Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge we are in Treaty One territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. I'd like to introduce the panel members via Zoom this afternoon. Ms. Gail Anderson and Brian Carlin. And representing the assessment department is Karina Durovny. Hope I said that right, Karina?
Yes.
And representing the Board of Revision this afternoon for administrative help is Tristan Breeden. And myself, I'm sitting as chair. I am Mike Caputo. To the Zoom participants of this hearing, please note you are placed in waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing is concluded, you can leave the meeting. You will be hearing an application for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to any application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if matter pertains to application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to surmise if they wish. Once all the evidence about the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. Session will close after all applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decisions by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We'll be hearing items 2, 3, and 4 today on our docket. Mr. Breeden, please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony at this time. Thank you.
Madam Assessor, please state your full name.
Karine Durovny.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mark Newman.
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
Perfect. Do you affirm that this evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, please be
You were
seated.
testing me.
Mr. Elme, would you like to walk us through your presentation at this time? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For file number 24-3544, roll number 0307157400 is the address of 1499 Buffalo Place. We are defending the assessed value of $6,769,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1st, 2023. It consists of 4 buildings with 1 to 2 stories, with an actual build of 1968 to 1995. We have an effective year built of 1979. It has a wall height of 11 to 22 feet. And with the 4 buildings, the breakdown is a 33,882 square feet, built in 1968 with a wall height of 20 feet. 5,085 square feet, built in 1968 as well, with 11 feet of wall height. 976 square feet, built in 1994 with 12 feet wall height, and 11,812 square feet, built in 1995 with a wall height of 22 feet. There is a leasable area of 62,295 square feet with a land to plan area of 2.84. Maps are provided on page 3, showing its location. It's located near McGillivray Boulevard off of either Buffalo Place or Otter Street. Exterior photos on page 4 and aerial views page 5 through 7. Page 8 has our rent comparables. They are net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We provided 7 rent comparables with lease starting in 2014 to 2019. Area range from 44,000 to 94,974 square feet. Wall height range of 20 to 30 feet. An effective year build of 1961 to 2003. And a net rent of $7.75 to $10.14 per square foot. You'll find our income workup on page 9. The 2 premises include 62,295 square feet with a blended rent of $8.35, provide a potential rent of $519,991. We reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4.5%. Plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $470,480. We've capitalized that at 6.95%, in which generates our capitalized value of $6,769,496, in which we rounded down to $6,769,000. You'll find our capitalization rates on page 11. In which provide the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.30 at the 80th percentile. Our cap rate of 6.95 is at the top portion of this range. On page 13 through 17 is the income expense provided to us. Provided 2 of the first portion. The one is empty on page 13, but on page 15 is the completed portion in which states a net income with the rent provided and the total leasable area provides a net rent of $6.48. However, this property is owner occupied. The owner and tenant are the same company, therefore no weight can be put on the income and expense rent. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $6,769,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, questions for the assessor?
Yes. So as you noted, the building was built in stages, and except for the 11,812 square foot portion built in 95, all of the rest of it was built in either 1968 or 1974, correct?
The 976 square feet, we have it as 1994.
Okay, fair enough. And then, but you're giving it an effective age of 1979 overall?
Correct.
And if we look at your comparables on page 8, would you agree with me? Well, actually, let's come back. You told us that the wall heights for the portions built in 1968 are 20 feet on the 30,000 square foot odd portion, 33,000, and 11 feet on the 5,085 square foot, correct?
Correct.
And then the 11,812 square foot portion built in 1995, the wall height there is 22 feet, correct?
The two portions that are the larger square footage is 20 and 22 feet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Forgive me for interrupting for just a moment. Mr. Rockney, where did you have the breakdown of each of those buildings? Because I don't see it in the brief that I have, so I appreciate that you probably have it in front of you and maybe Mr. Newman does, but for the board's sake, did you put it into your brief?
No, it wasn't automatically created. No, it was
Gotcha.
not in the brief.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions. That's the thought there. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So then continuing on page 8, all of your comparables in terms of wall height, there's 2 at 20 feet and everything else is higher than that, correct?
The first two are 22 feet, so that would cover that.
And then the last 3 are 26, 27, and 30 feet respectively, correct?
Correct.
Correct?
Oh, yes, sorry, correct. I thought you heard me.
Then on page 9, everything on page 9 is model generated, correct?
Yes, correct.
I don't see any comparable rents for mezzanine space. Were you able to find any?
No,
I'm not surprised, because I can never find any either. Because I think the reality is, and I'm asking you to agree with this, that when people lease buildings, the mezzanine frequently is a throw-in. It often doesn't get an assigned rent.
correct.
You agree with that? Okay, thank you. And then if we come back to page 8 for a moment, your comparables, did the model kick those out as well?
So your question is, does the model?
Did the model select those as well?
No, I did.
Okay. And I notice that your most recent lease of that group of comparables is 2019, correct?
Correct.
You could find nothing more recent than that?
No, these were the best ones.
They're the best ones. All right. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Ms. Anderson, questions at this time?
Thank you. Just in regards to your page 8, the comparables that you have, are any of those comparables within the same area as the subject property?
Yes, the third one, 100 Irene Street, that one is in the same area.
Okay, thank you. Those are my only questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carlin, questions at this time?
Nope, no questions, thank you.
Thank you, and my only question was where the building breakdowns were, but both that's been asked and answered, so thank you very much. Mr. Newman, would you like to walk through your presentation?
I will. So I'm on page 1 of my brief, and I recite the particulars of the property, which we've heard already. I indicate to you that capitalization rate is an issue. I tell you now that it's not, and ultimately we're not challenging the capitalization rate. So this case is all about rent, and that's the decision you're going to have to make. You'll see on my page 2 and continuing on to page 3, a series of comparables. I looked for 2 things. I looked for as recent as I could find, and I looked for a large size as well. And you can see that I've got 3 leases in February of 2020, July of 21, December of 21. Sherwin Road at $5.95 a square foot, 1530 Gamble at $6 a square foot. Gamble is right across the street from the subject property. 1000 King Edward, 85,000 square feet, December of 21. at $5. Border at $4.06. And then three that are a little bit older on McLeod and Sargent and Sherwin, but again, all large size. And finally, over onto page 3, Dublin in September of 18 at $5.50. The average of those rates is $5.18. The median is $5.25. Now, I just want to make an observation to you about a comment the assessor made, because she said that it's an owner-occupied property. And I'll quibble with that just a little bit, in the sense that the occupant of the property is actually a publicly traded company, Pollard Banknote. So they trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and so they are owned by the public at large. The owners of the real estate are ultimately the Pollard family. So there is that connection. I do agree with that. But again, strictly speaking, it's not owner occupied, because the occupier, the tenant, is the publicly traded company. And then the other observation I make to you is, because there is the connection between the operating company and between the ownership group, the Pollard family, the lease rates are the subject of review by a committee to make sure there's no conflict. And so, yes, the lease rate in place is $6.48 a square foot. I think ultimately, when you look at my comparables, I think very reasonably could have come here and could have said the rate should be lower than $6.48. But I've not done that. I've held to the $6.48 per square foot rate put in place. I make an observation about the assessor's comparables and my question about whether she could find anything newer, and she indicated they were the best she could find. I guess the question is, best from what perspective? Certainly I was able to find newer ones and large ones. And I certainly don't have access to all the information that the assessor does, but be that as it may, that's her view. I say to you simply, these leases are dated. I say to you that my leases are more up to date, and I invite you to accept the rate of $6.48. And I say to you that, generally speaking, the wall heights of the comparable properties of the assessor are higher. Yes, there are a couple of 22, and there is a portion of the space, 11,812 square feet of the subject property, that's 22. But the great majority of it is 20 and 12 and 11, and the comparables 26, 27, 30. So, you know, from a wall height perspective, which ultimately means clear ceiling, I think the assessor's comparables are superior to the subject, which would lead to a downward adjustment. I just don't see where this rate of $8.35 is coming from. I don't think it's supported by the market. And as I say, I think bottom line for you is I'm asking you to prefer my comparables as a better guide, but ultimately I've used the rate in place of $6.48, which, as I've said, could easily have been lower relying on the market comparables. That's my submission. I'm open to questions.
Mr. Rockney, please, questions at this time?
Yes, thank you. Perhaps just one. In regards to your comparables, I did not have a chance to take a good look at it, but I was just wondering, in regards to those lease dates, are they, I suppose my question is, how accurate are the rates? Are they, was there a step up, I suppose is what I'm asking.
So what I will say to you, for example, is 1000 King Edward, December of 2021, is a brand new lease with a Northwest company for that 85,000 square feet. They were not previously a tenant. The July of 21 lease at 1169 Sherwin was a brand new lease. And I did the appeal of both of those buildings, so I'm well familiar with the circumstances. 1175 Sherwin was a new lease at that point in time. Admittedly, it's a little bit dated. So what I'm going to say to you is generally, these are not step ups. These are lease rates put in place at the dates.
Thank you so much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carmel, do you have questions at this point?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Anderson, questions at this point?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Just in regards to your lease comparables there on page 2, you indicated 1530 Gamble is right across the street from the subject property. Are there any others on the list that are right in that neighborhood as well?
No.
No. Okay. And the Gamble, the 1530 Gamble, I note that the wall height isn't included.
Yes, omission on my part, and without going back to my data, I can't give you the answer to that as we sit here.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you very much. So Mr. Newman, I guess the only question I have for you is this. You're asking the board to use $6.48 a square foot for the rent. You're agreeing with all the rest of the city parameters, excluding the cap rate. You're asking for a value of $4,970,000. Is
Yes,
that the number that you're looking for?
it is, and indeed, and my apologies, I should have done this. Page 20 of my brief
Fair enough.
is the spreadsheet.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that we had it on record.
Yeah.
I guess just as a more for information question, you did not have enough time to have a conversation with Mr. Rockney from the assessment department regarding this?
We did have a conversation. Mr. Rockney has been, I'll frame it generally accessible and willing to discuss.
Excellent.
But ultimately, we reached an impasse over certain issues.
Fair enough. All right. Those are my questions. Any final comments on this, Mr. Rockney?
I suppose mainly the main, as Mr. Newman had mentioned, the main issue is the rent. And I think it goes with what we have found out regarding the connection of the parties, and we saw it as owner occupied. So that is all.
Fair enough. Mr. Newman, any final comments?
As I said, in some ways, I think I quite reasonably could have come with a rent less than $6.48. I chose not to under the circumstances because of the way that lease rate was structured with the involvement of outside review, and that's all I'll say.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. That concludes item number 2 on the docket. We move forward to item number 3. That being 63 Milner Street. Mr. Rockney, would you please walk us through your presentation this afternoon?
Yes, thank you. File number 24-3504, roll number 14063701500 for the address of 63 Milner Street. We are defending the assessed value of $2,659,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of one building with 1 story, built in 1967, with an effective year built of 1971, with a wall height of 15 feet, leasable area of 24,100 square feet, with a land to plan area of 2.60. Maps are provided on page 3, showing its location. It is located off of Inkster Boulevard or Church Avenue in the Maples area and Inkster Industrial Park. Exterior photos are provided on page 4 and aerial views on page 5 and 6. Page 7 has our rent comparables, in which our net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We provided 8 rent comparables with lease starting in 2018 to 2022. Area range from 19,336 to 30,180 square feet. Wall height range of 18 to 26 feet. An effective year build of 1965 to 1979, and a net rent of $6.24 to $7 per square foot. You'll find our income workup on page 8. The one premise of 24,100 square feet with a rent of $6.75 per square foot, providing potential rent of $162,675. We reduced that by a vacancy loss of 3.5%. plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $148,898. We've capitalized that at 5.6%, in which generates our capitalized value of $2,658,893, in which we rounded up to $2,659,000. You will find our capitalization rates on page 10. Which provides the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.30 at the 80th percentile. Our cap rate of 5.6 falls in this range. On page 12 through 17 is the income and expense we received. The first portion was empty, but on page 14, completed and advised owner occupied. On page 16, advises Plasticom utilizing the space, but again, owner occupied. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $2,659,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hewitt, questions at this time?
Yes. So if we look at your page 8, entirely model driven.
Yes.
And if we come back to your page 1, so this is a 1967 building with a 15-foot wall height. In relative terms, 15 feet for an industrial type building is a low wall height, correct?
Yes, as it is on the low end.
And if I could say it this way, from a good, better, best perspective, I might even say to you, well, I'll say to you, it's not best, it's not better. I might even say to you, it's not good, but certainly from a good, better, best perspective, it's at the bottom of that ranking of 15-foot height. Agreed?
That depends what it's being used for. Debate.
And similarly, the land to plan area of 2.6. Certainly, if somebody were looking to expand a facility, there's not a lot of additional room in terms of land to allow for expansion, correct?
I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay, fair enough. So at this point, as we sit here today, the building is coming on 58 years old, correct?
Correct.
Now, your rent comparables on page 7. So I took a look at these, and for example, your first comparable, 2136 Notre Dame, the space is 22,000 square feet, but that's part of a 63,800 square foot overall building, correct?
I just don't know for certain for that. Sorry.
Okay. Your second one, 1601 Church, again, looking into this, this is part of a 168,000 square foot building. Can you confirm that?
I cannot, but the reason why I chose that one is it's in the same market region.
Fair enough. Similarly, the third one, 1680 Church, again, part of a 91,000 square foot building, correct?
Not too sure about that, but same market region.
Okay, all right, well, let me just say this, and I'll leave it there. I looked, because obviously the subject is a freestanding building, and so I was curious as to what these comparables were, and that's fine. Would you agree with me that every one of the comparables has a wall height that is superior, higher than the subject?
That's correct. It was difficult to find a low wall height.
And would you agree with me that in terms of the rents, you're using, or the model has used a rent of $6.75 a square foot, but of all of your comparables, there is a single comparable at $7, which is 1680 Church. There's a single comparable at $6.75, which is the first one, 2136 Notre Dame, and all the other comparables are less than.
Correct.
Now, the capitalization rate, let's go to your page 10. So, the data tells us that the 20th percentile for all types of industrial is 5.35%. Correct?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The data, your capitalization rate sheet, page 10, tells us that the 20th percentile for all the listed types of industrial is 5.35%.
The 20%.
Are we having a bit of an audio issue? We okay?
Yeah, it's just your voice is coming off really soft and quiet.
It's hard to believe that anybody says I'm soft and quiet. But I mean that seriously. Nobody's ever accused me of, are panel members having an issue? So that's why I asked, because there seemed to be a bit of a lag, and I was wondering if maybe there was an audio issue.
Yeah, it could be from our aspect.
But you're okay. I'll be sure to speak up. So coming back, page 10, the 20th percentile on all types of listed industrial is 5.35%.
Correct.
And that means the 20th percentile means that those properties are among the 20% best of the industrial properties, correct?
Yes.
And so at the end, and then there's a range between 5.35 and 7.3. And so that's a range of 195 basis points or 1.95%. And yet the model has put the subject property within 0.25% of the 20th percentile among the very best. So let me ask you this. Do we agree that this is not an A-class industrial building?
I mean, I still think it is a great property. I don't see it being lower than. I would disagree. I think the way that the model generated it is that at a decent position.
And how did the model generate it? Do you have any idea why the model decided that this property should have a cap rate of 5.6%?
I mean, definitely no risk. It's been owner occupied.
But we're not talking about the owner. We're talking about the buyer. We're talking about the market.
Mhm.
Do Do you think the model determined that it was owner occupied? And that's why the cap rate should be lower?
Well, then there's no risk that all the other features with the actual year built.
It's
At least-
old, it's 58 years old. Okay, I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newman. Mr. Carlin, do you have questions at this time?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Anderson, questions? You're muted, Ms. Anderson.
Apologies, I have no questions at this time. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you very much. And I am equally interested in the question that Mr. Newman posed with respect to the capitalization rate of 5.6%. And one of the problems that I'm having is, I believe Mr. Newman seems to be having, is that it's a 15-foot ceiling, which you would agree probably for industrial buildings is on the low end of the acceptable kind of a range. Now, I appreciate each industrial manufacturer has certain requirements, but at the end of the day, would that not make this building more inferior to the other properties with 20-foot ceilings, which seems to be predominant in your range of comparisons today?
I wouldn't completely disagree. I personally believe because it's been occupied ever since it was built, there's that lack of risk. But again, it's model driven, so it's based on more than just the wall height.
But that detail, the wall height would be part of what the model looks at when it's comparing industrial building, would it not?
It is one of the features, but it's
Of
there's a lot
course.
more.
And I agree, it's just one of the features, but it is in industrial buildings, that is a feature that is more key than most buildings. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Okay. And I also would note on your comparisons, I think Mr. Newman touched on it briefly, but the comp at number one being 2136 Notre Dame. That has a year built of 1965 and a wall height of 18 feet. And that matches the rent per square foot on the subject property. You feel that that's your best comparison?
It was the best ones I was able to find. I'm under the impression that most properties that would be most comparable are owner occupied. So difficult to find actual net rents.
Fair enough, I know your pain at that point. But my question is, with respect to that particular property, is it a single tenanted building, or is it a part of a larger building that just has a specific tenant in it?
That's a very good question.
Because Mr. Newman alluded to the fact that the building was part of something larger. And I'm wanting to understand if in fact this is just a part of a larger building, or is this a building with its own premise ID and owner or tenant in it, whether it be owner occupied or not, I don't know, but.
I could take a quick peek. I don't know if I can.
That
I
would be helpful.
It does have two areas. It appears.
So this is basically one premise out of
Out of two.
two. All right. Those are my questions. I would only note for your future referencing, when you create a table, please put numbers associated with each line. It just makes it a little easier.
Sorry, a number association.
Number associated with each address, as opposed to calling out the address. Like comp 1, comp 2, comp 3. That's all I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Mr. Rockman? Oh, sorry. What? My apologies. His final thoughts are coming later.
I was too quiet.
You're too quiet this time.
All right,
Please, thank you.
so we've got two issues here. We've got a rent issue and we've got a capitalization rate issue. So this 15-foot wall height issue, and I want to be crystal clear on something. There's a difference between the height of the wall and the clear span beneath the roof line. Frequently, buildings of this type are built with steel girders or joists, and the clear span below that is typically a couple of feet less. And so when we talk about a 15-foot wall height, we're really probably talking about, give or take, a 12.5-foot clear span beneath. The point simply is that, and let's be crystal clear on something, we're talking about the market. We're not talking about the fact that it might be owner occupied. That's completely irrelevant. What is the market going to pay? How is the market going to perceive and value this building, taking into account its attributes? And I say to you simply, a building with a 15-foot wall height, 12.5-foot give or take ceiling clearance is less valuable than a building with a 20 or 22 or 26-foot wall height and a 17 or 19 or 23-foot ceiling clearance. It's just the reality of these buildings. They are more valuable in the marketplace with that attribute. And may I say respectfully that the assessor's view that there's no risk because it's been occupied, first of all, neither she nor I know who's occupied it from day one. We know who's occupied it for some period of time, but we don't know what the long history of this building is since it's coming on 58 years. But I say again, respectfully, I think it is completely irrelevant that it's owner occupied. The issue is, what would the willing buyer pay to the willing seller in the open market? So let's turn back to the issue of rents. If you go to my page 3, you'll see a series of comparable rents that I've located. And it's interesting that the assessor's comparable rents, frankly, if you average all of them up, it's $6.48. But the reality is, one of them is equal. One of them is 25 cents a square foot higher, a 1974 building with a 24-foot wall height. The rest are all lower than the model rent that's being put upon the property. So I've given you a series of rents on page 3. The majority of them are in the Inkster Industrial Park. In my experience, traditionally, rents in Inkster Industrial Park have been somewhat less than rents in other industrial areas of the city. But I've given you 4 rents in Inkster Industrial. I've given you a couple of rents on 1440 Wellington, and I've given you a rent at 1169 Sherwin Road. And that is a 2-premise building, to be clear, and that is one of the 2 premises in that building. But it is a relatively recent lease. And so at the end of the day, I'm suggesting to you that a rent of $5.75 a square foot is appropriate, taking into account all of these factors. Let me then turn to capitalization rate. And let me say to you, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes longer here because the next property we're going to deal with The issue there is only capitalization rate. And by spending a little bit more time here, I'll tell you the majority of this story once and will be more efficient. So I think we all know, but sometimes it's important to remember that the capitalization rate is a reflection of a couple of things. One is the risk that the marketplace puts upon the property. The other is the expected or desired rate of return that an investor wants. And that in turn is informed to some extent by the returns available in alternative investments. If I can buy a government bond and get 6%, am I going to buy a piece of real estate with some risk? Well, the answer might be yes. The answer might be no, depending on my personal appetite for risk. Some would never buy real estate, of course. Some would never buy the bond. And there's a lot of people in between. But it's the risk, and it reflects what the market wants to do. I talk at pages 4, 5, 6, and 7 of my report about the cost of borrowing. And that's really a discussion about interest rates. And I know completely that we never look at debt service as part of the valuation of real estate. Understand that completely. But interest rates inform and have an impact, a significant impact on capitalization rates. And capitalization rates, of course, is part of what we must determine. Interest rates, in many ways, are the engine that drives the real estate economy. As interest rates go up, things slow down. And sometimes the economy crashes, and sometimes the real estate economy crashes because of increases in interest rates. What I tell you simply is that between April 1 of 2021 and April 1 of 2023, the Bank of Canada rate went up by 425 basis points, 4.25%. That is a huge, huge spike in interest rates. It had an impact on mortgage rates. And if you look at my page 6, you can see the chart produced by CB Richard Ellis of what has happened with capitalization rates for Class A industrial and Class B industrial. And let's be crystal clear, this property is not Class A. And I'll come to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. This is Class B, and you can see the rate has spiked up for both Class A and Class B, but higher still for Class B because it's a lesser quality, an inferior asset, and therefore it is higher risk. At page 8 and 9, I deal with vacancy. We can skip past that. At page 9, I talk about buildings. And at the end of the day, and I've said this to other panels, you've all been sitting as panel members for a long time. There's probably not a lot I can tell you that you haven't heard already. But what I want to tell you is you have a sense, you know where buildings fit in a spectrum. And yes, we may argue back and forth a little bit about what the boundaries of that slot in the spectrum are, but you know where buildings fit. And I say to you simply, this is not a 5.6 cap rate building, and I'll explain to you why. So let's look at page 10. These are attributes that are commonly referenced in speaking about qualities of industrial buildings. Ceiling clearance or clear height, important. Loading docks, important. Land to building ratio, important. Where's the building located? How proximate to major traffic arteries is it? Loading doors, fire suppression systems, column-free bays. Buildings that don't meet these requirements aren't A, and they're not even B buildings. What do the brokers say? Page 11. So Collier says that a Class A industrial building is a newer, fully featured industrial building, high quality steel and concrete, modern, efficient mechanical, electrical systems, high ceilings, good loading capacity, air-conditioned offices, and extensive yard storage truck marshaling areas. A B building is average to good quality, somewhat dated, good functional space, less extensive features, usually characterized by lower clear ceiling heights and fewer shipping doors. CBRE says much the same thing, as does Cushman. Cushman puts some square footage numbers to it, noting that a Class A is typically going to be between 100 and 300,000 square feet. So what do they then say in terms of their capitalization rates, the brokers? And this is really, all of what I'm going to speak to you about is really found in the assessor's chart as well. But if we look onto page 12, CBRE Q1 of 2023 says A-class buildings are in the range of 5.5 to 6.5. B-class buildings are 6.5 to 7.5. Colliers says 5 3/4 to 6.5 for the A's and 6 to 7 for the B's. Cushman says the B's are 6 to 6.5. Sorry, in Q1 of 23, 6 to 6 3/4. And then I reproduce on page 13 the chart the assessor provides to you, and I point out, as you've already had me heard from me, this building is at 5.6, 25 basis points above the 20th percentile, which in theory represents the best of the buildings. Land to building ratio, you heard me speak about that a little bit already. Then at page 14, Altus has published a study on industrial sales. There's a couple that are actually in Inkster Industrial Park, 1635 Burroughs, a building that I actually have done in appeal, May of 21, noting a 6.48% capitalization rate. 205 Hutchings, also Inkster Industrial, January of 22, noting a 6.79% capitalization rate. You've got ages there. They are much younger, both of them, than the subject. And then they express some general conclusions at the bottom, and that B buildings will be in the range April 1 of 23 of 6.5 to 7.5%. At page 15, I again speak about attributes. I think I've already covered that already. I will indicate to you, though, that the land area is important for two reasons. One, it leaves room for easy truck maneuvering, easy access in and out. But secondly, sometimes if an occupant is doing well, they want more space. They want to expand. If you've got land area, you can expand. If you don't, then you're not as good as a building that does. So, page 16 and 17, I come to my conclusions. What have we got at April 1 of 23? We've got a lower land to building ratio. I've got it at 2.53, and the assessor's got it at 2.6. I think that's a rounding issue. Low ceiling height clearance, 11 to 12.5. Small business operator tenants, therefore the covenants aren't as strong. You're not getting international or national tenants in buildings of this type. You're not getting government or institutional quality tenants in buildings of this type. Therefore, upside rent increases are not as probable. The interest rate environment is rising, it's increasing. And thereby I'll suggest to you moving cap rates upwards as well. GICs at April of 2023, if you wanted to buy a GIC, you could get north of 5%. And so what I say to you at the end of the day, it's not a Class A building. It's at best a Class B building. At page 17, you see where all the brokers and Altus put the rates. And I say to you, and I select at the end of the day, a 6.25% capitalization rate. So I think, frankly, again, I've been reasonably conservative in my selection of the capitalization rate. I choose a rental rate of $5.75. And if you look to page 22 of my report, you'll see my spreadsheet reflecting that calculation. And at the end of the day, again, I think I've been quite conservative and reasonable in my approach. And then the final pages of my brief are excerpts from the appraisal of real estate textbook, which again speak about some of the attributes and things I've spoken about already. And then there is an article starting at page 27 that talks about the importance of the land to building ratio and truck maneuverability and room to move and all of those kinds of things. So I think that is my presentation. Let me just check the notes of the questions to the assessor. As I said earlier, I think the fact that it's been occupied maybe for a long time is irrelevant. I think clearly the height is a disadvantage for this property. And again, on the spectrum, puts it at the lower end. The 2136 Notre Dame comparable, the assessor checked. It's a two-premise premises. As I told you, I went and searched these out. Quadreal manages this property, and their website indicates that it's 63,800 square feet. And again, the assessor's comparables, typically younger, typically much higher wall heights, better buildings, and even then, most of the rents are lower. So I think the model needs some help here. Those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Questions, Mr. Rothney, please?
Yes. I had first just a quick, okay, maybe a question. In regards to the accessibility for the trucks, do you suggest that this is important with the type of manufacturing that it's, because I believe it's light manufacturing. Do you believe that it still is as important as a feature?
I think we need to make a distinction between a use that may be carried on by an occupant today and the attractiveness in the building in the marketplace more generally. And to me, what's important, more important, is the attractiveness and value of the building in the marketplace more generally. Buildings that have more of these attributes, which make buildings more useful, will always sell more readily, will always sell for more, and will always have a greater value as a consequence. So I think maneuverability is important and room for that is important, even though you may suggest that because there's an occupant there, it must work for them, so it should be okay. But I don't think that's the test. I think the test is how will the market value it?
Fair enough. On your page 3, your first few rents at the top, I'm just noticing because this subject property is at 24,000 leasable space. Wasn't sure if those were your best comparables.
So there are a spectrum of comparables, and I agree, one of them is 4580, and then 10,500, and then 37,797. So essentially what they're doing is they're bracketing the size of the subject property.
Okay. And then your last comparable there, your 1601 Church. I was noticing I also had that one on my list of comparables. It appears they're two different space.
Yes.
The 10,001 and I have the 30,001. So just noticing if yours was a step up at all.
No, I think again, this is a large building. Goldstone Developers own this building. The building's 168,000 square feet. So there are multiple premises in the building.
And just a last question for your page 14. Those comparables as well, I was noticing the square footage was quite high for a few of them. Which one would you suggest is your best comparable?
Well, I would look particularly to the the ones in Inkster Industrial, which is the first one 1635 Burroughs and the second one 205 Hutchins.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rocky. Ms. Anderson, questions?
I have no questions. Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome. Mr. Carlin, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think I have any questions. Thank you very much. Any final thoughts on this, Mr. Rocky?
Thank you.
Mr. Newman?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes item number 3. We will move on to the item number 4, the last on the docket for this afternoon. And that is in Winfield Way. Mr. Rockney, would you like to walk us through that, please?
Certainly. File number 24-3526, roll number 13096006100 for the address of 15 Winfield Way. We are defending the assessed value of $3,277,000 for the 2025 rural year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of one building with 1 story, built in 2000, with a wall height of 23 feet. The leasable area is 23,000 square feet and a land to plan area of 2.63. Maps are provided on page 3 showing its location. It is located west of Route 90 off of Bowman's Creek Boulevard. Exterior photo is provided on page 4, as well as indoor photos following it. Aerial views on page 9 and 10. Page 11 has our rent comparables. They are net rents from the market in which our model is based off of. We provided 6 rent comparables, all in the same market region with lease starting in 2016 to 2021. Area range of 22,695 to 29,979 square feet with a wall height of 18 to 28 feet. An effective year built of 1989 to 2002. And a net rent of $6.75 to $9.75 per square foot. You will find our income workup on page 12. The one premise of 23,000 square feet with a rent of $7.38 per square foot provided a potential rent of $169,740. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 3.5% plus expenses at 3% with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $155,665. We've capitalized that at 4.75%, in which generates our capitalized value of $3,277,158, in which we rounded down to $3,277,000. We will find our capitalization rates on page 14, in which provides the industrial range of 5.35 at the 20th percentile to 7.30 at the 80th percentile. Our 4.75 cap rate is lower than the 20th percentile due to the subject property being a newer build, and we feel that it also has no risk. Page 16 to 18 is the income statement we received, advising a $7.55 base rent and utilizing all of the space. We do have it at $7.38. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $3,277,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, questions?
So the only issue here is cap rate, I'll say to everyone.
Fair.
So page 14, your cap rate chart. First of all, do we agree that this is not a Class A industrial building?
I believe we actually do think it is a Class A.
You do, I see. What makes it a Class A in your mind?
A bunch of different thoughts, but basically it's model generated, so it's put it at that, and the main feature is that it's a newer build.
So you're saying that anything that is newer is automatically a Class A?
No, but it's one of the most important aspects.
And is land to building ratio a factor in determining what category or class a building will fall into?
Definitely an aspect, yes.
And is ceiling height something that will speak to what class it'll fall into?
Correct.
And what about ease of access, location? Is that a factor that will make it or speak to which class it will fall into?
Correct.
But I think what you're telling us is that the model determined that the cap rate should be 4.75%, correct? And you didn't, through any process, select the capitalization rate. The model determined it. Is that fair?
Fair.
But those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mueller. Mr. Carlin, questions at this point?
Actually, may I ask just one more thing? My apologies.
Go ahead.
Look at the photos at page 9 and 10 of your brief. So, and your photos aren't at a high enough elevation. Actually, if you look at the one at the top of page 10, are you aware that to get to this property, you actually have to come into a cul-de-sac? And that you can just see it at the top of the top photo on page 10?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that looking at these photos that practically there is no room to expand this building if one ever wanted to?
Correct.
I think you're saying yes, but again, you're
Sorry, maybe I'm being soft and quiet. Correct.
yes. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, again, Mr. Carlin?
The only question I had was whether this building was actually recently inspected.
It's a fair question. I was built in 2000. Could find out briefly. My apologies, there's some notes, but nothing about a recent inspection, it appears.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much. That was my only question.
Thank you, Mr. Carlin. Ms. Anderson, questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions at this time. Thank you. Mr. Mueller, please.
Page 2 of my brief. Again, in the top section, the detail of how the assessment is calculated. It's located off Omans Creek Way, which is in turn off Logan, west of Keewatin. I'll show you some overhead photos. 2023 value by agreement was $2,343,000, and the 2025 value is proposed at near to $900,000 higher. That is a humongous increase for a property of this type. We accept the rent, as we've said. You've heard me about land to building ratio. It says 2.46 there. I accept that it's 2.63. Again, land to building ratio is important. I'll show you some photos. So on the cap rate, again, and this is why I took a few minutes on the prior one, because it's much the same presentation. What is a cap rate at page 3? The increased cost of borrowing and the impact that has on capitalization rates at page 6. And again, and I must say, I've seen it this cycle where there are some cap rates that just seem so surprisingly low, and I can't figure out why it's happening. But it seems to be, and I just think investors, buyers, the market is not going to look at a building like this and assign it a capitalization rate that is 60 basis points, 0.6% below the best of the buildings. So let's skip ahead. Page 10, again, attributes of buildings. I've spoken about some of these things. You know, here the wall height is 23 feet. So the ceiling, clear ceiling isn't going to be bad at about 20 feet. Land to building ratio, not ideal here, I'll suggest. Proximate to major traffic arteries, little complicated, I'll suggest to you to get in and out. And I'll show you some photos. The broker definitions again. And then on page 12, we've got the broker capitalization rates. And you can see that even for the Class A buildings, CBRE puts the Class A's at 5.5 at the low end, 6.5 at the high end, the B's 6.5 to 7.5, Colliers, the A's at 5.75 to 6.5, Cushman, the A's at 5.25 to 5.75, and the B's at 6 to 6.75. So again, I come back to page 14 and some sales as reflected in the Altus study they have published. And again, you can see the capitalization rates for B buildings. They're suggesting in the range of 6.5 to 7.5%. The page 15 is some discussion again of the attributes. So what do we then say about the subject property? Well, it's got a low land to building ratio, relatively speaking, at 2.63, not 2.46, as I said. There's actually mezzanine. I didn't ask about it, but there's actually mezzanine, which typically doesn't attract rent. You're not going to get government or institutional quality tenants in this type of building, and you're not going to get pension funds looking to buy a building of this type. Rising interest rate environment. So this is not an A building. It's not newer and fully featured. It's not big, 100 to 300,000 square feet. It doesn't have extensive yard storage and truck marshaling areas. It's at best a B building. On page 17, you see the range of rates again for the B buildings. And so at the end of the day, and again, I think we're being pretty reasonably conservative. We've selected a 6.25% capitalization rate, and that yields a value of $2,490,000. And I'll show you in a moment the spreadsheet that speaks to that. Look at page 18. So this is an overhead photo, but now you can see how you get in and out of this place. And you know, it's kind of unusual to have an industrial building and to bring semi-trailers in and out of a facility having to wind their way around a cul-de-sac. And my guess is well, I don't know how they do it actually, but they know how to do it, obviously. It's awkward access is what I'll say. There's really no room to expand on this land, on this property, and that's a function of the land to building ratio again. Page 21 is my spreadsheet reflecting my calculation of value of $2,490,000. And then the final pages are that same article that was in the last report about the importance of land to building ratio and land for maneuvering, etc. So at the end of the day, cap rate is the sole issue. Assessors at 4.75. I'm at 6.25. I'm open to questions.
And your rounded number would be $2,491,000.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Questions, Mr. Ruppin, please?
Yes, just one. I noticed on your page 2, you had indicated the 2023 value of $2,343,000. And sorry, and this, there was a sale in 2014 for $2,100,000. And your final value for 2025 is $2,491,000.
Yes.
Just wanted clarification. Thank you. No questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Anderson, questions at this time?
I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Carlin, questions at this time?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Newman, I'm just, you made this comment a couple of times, and I just try to explore it a little bit more further. And I appreciate the land to building ratio is a certain number. And obviously, in this particular instance, there really isn't any place for the building to expand. But this was built in 2000, so I'm assuming that whoever built this building built it to suit their needs, and they've made use of this lot in a fairly good way from what I see from the pictures.
So, again, there's the ideal piece of property, which is vacant, upon which you can build the ideal building. Ideal, of course, being through the eyes of the market generally, a specific user, somewhere in between. Those are all possibilities. So without question, and because it's on a cul-de-sac, the inherent nature of cul-de-sac lots is they tend to be somewhat pie-shaped. Wider towards the back, narrower towards the front, because there's a limited amount of access around the cul-de-sac. So whoever developed this area, developed this subdivision, I'll call it, and developers, of course, they always want to get the largest number of lots they can, because that's how they make their money. How somebody then comes along and puts a building on it and how they design it, that's not necessarily their problem. Although obviously if they can give better lots, in theory, they may get more money for them. But coming back to your question, again, it's more generally, it's how's the market going to perceive the property? And yes, the fact that there's a user there today and it works for them. What we don't know as we sit here is, does it work for them well and efficiently, or does it work for them less well and it actually costs them some money from an efficiency perspective because it works less well? If you've got a building, if you've got a property that's too small, for example, then maybe you can't store inventory. Maybe you have to buy storage somewhere else. Maybe you have to make arrangements with a supplier to hold. Maybe that turns into a small cost increase. There's a variety of elements of that type. And obviously, again, you can put everything in the pot and into the soup, and out will come a wonderful soup or an okay soup or a bad soup. But the point is that in the spectrum of the marketplace, buildings have attributes, they have qualities that are more or less desirable to the market, and that ultimately is reflected in what people will pay.
Yeah, and ultimately, again, further to a comment that you had made with respect to, there's room for expansion. Ultimately, businesses like this may start off in a building like this that suits their needs at the time. And as they grow, they may realize they need a bigger building.
Yep.
And at that point, they have no choice but to say, we're leaving here and going to a bigger building.
And if they're the owner, they'll have to sell. If
Sure.
they're the tenant, they'll move on, and then the landlord will have to find a new tenant. And again, ability to find a tenant will be a function of the combination of the qualities and attributes the building has.
Yeah.
And that's why there's always a spectrum of qualities that buildings have. None of them are perfect, whatever perfect means. And so that's why the valuation process we're involved in is to some significant extent an art and a question of judgment ultimately, and a question of recognition of the variety of attributes properties have.
Fair enough. Those are my questions. I thank you for your presentation, staff. Any final thoughts, Mr. Rothman?
Perhaps just a quick summation in that regard. In regards to the judgment aspect, that perhaps it would be a different scenario shall the tenant did relocate and it was currently vacant. We do have this tenant still occupying the space since 2000. So I just wanted to make that comment. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, any final?
I don't know that the present occupant has been occupying the space since 2000. We don't know that. We know the building was built in 2000. And again, the assessor, both in this hearing and in a prior one, seems to put a lot of emphasis on occupancy. And I appreciate that there's a difference between occupancy, I'll suggest, and what I'll call chronic vacancy. When there's chronic vacancy, it'll suggest a building has a problem, and then you do something special. When you don't do anything special, then you simply apply market. And I think we've had market applied across the board on this property, except I question the capitalization rate of 4.75%, suggesting that that cannot be market for a building of this type. You've heard me, I'm repeating, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We've, at this point, we've heard all the items scheduled and this hearing now is adjourned. Thank you again for your submissions both, and I appreciate your time and patience. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Thank you.